Is selling arms to Russia reviving North Korea's economy? Some economists think Pyongyang could oversee its biggest economic growth for almost a decade this year. So let's get a deeper understanding of how that can be with Anwita Basu from Fitch Solutions. She keeps a much closer eye on North Korea and its economy than most of us. So thank you very much for being with us, Anwita. I mean, what do you know about the state of the North Korean economy right now?
Well, Robert, it's been in a decline for the past 5 years. Actually more. Since 2017, we've seen negative growth, and these are all based on estimates that we get from South Korea's central bank.
Right, because
So
there's
we
no data
have to be
actually out of
mindful
North
that
Korea
some of
itself,
these
right?
estimates. Precisely. They haven't been publishing data since the 1990s. So unfortunately, we're quite hamstrung when it comes to statistics from North Korea. But effectively, the economy has been in recession for the past 3 years since the pandemic, and for even longer if you were to consider since the 2012s. So we are expecting positive growth this year. This was before the Russian arms trade deal, and potentially that could shore up the economy. But again, it's very difficult to sort of piece together the direct impacts, as I'm sure we'll be discussing later on.
Yeah, let's absolutely do that. And I think just where I'd like to start is by talking about the relationship that's developed between Russia and North Korea and the cooperation that has been occurring in terms of the supply of arms, which all kind of began with a meeting back in September. We can just show you some pictures, actually. In an extremely rare trip out of his country, leader Kim Jong-un travelled to the far east of Russia to meet with Vladimir Putin. And there you see it. It was widely seen in the West as an act of desperation, really, by the Russian president. However, evidence does suggest that North Korea has since been providing ballistic missiles and millions of artillery rounds for Russia's war machine in Ukraine. So, Anwita Basu, I mean, how big a contribution could serving Russia's military needs be making to North Korea's economy?
Well, again, if the South Korean intelligence is to be believed, and I see no reason why they shouldn't be, there have been 10 sort of consignments that have been sent to Russia so far. And this have all been sort of drawdowns from existing stockpiles. So, from an economic perspective, when stockpiles are drawn down, that it doesn't actively sort of contribute to growth or GDP. It's effectively just an accounting sort of framework, and it doesn't add to employment and so on. But if this transaction, and there's again based on our view on the war, if this transaction continues into the foreseeable future, and we do expect a sort of stalemate status quo to be maintained for the next at least 2 to 3 years, there is reason to believe that. The North Korean defense sector would have to expand, and then that
Right.
directly, adds to employment and so on.
So for the moment, they're not actually making munitions to provide to Russia. They've already got them, but if it's a longer term situation, they're actually going to have to start manufacturing things and sourcing the materials for those and then hiring more people and potentially paying people more. So is that something that's going to have a wider implication for the North Korean economy?
Yes, certainly. I mean, the North Korean economy works off their sort of principle of juche, which is sort of self-reliance, which basically means, and it doesn't often work, but then it basically means that they try to be as self-reliant as possible when it comes to particularly arms production. And if they have import needs, they end up sort of buying things from China, who is their main sort of trading partner. Um, they do have sort of a fairly advanced defense sector by now. They've been investing and developing it since the 1950s, and the stockpiles are believed to be large enough to match Russia's current needs, because they're currently supplying fairly primitive artillery to Russia to kind of keep up with the heavy bombing that Russia hopes to do over the next 12 months or so. But if expansion is needed, at the minute, estimates are that the North Korean defense sector directly employs around 2 million people, which is roughly 8% of the total population. It's not, it's hard to estimate the labor force as such, but 8% of the total population. That is actually half of what the agrarian sector employees. Again, estimates are around 17% of the total population. But the ancillary around it, so your manufacturing, your mining, your construction, will be kind of supported as well if capacity is required um, to top up
Right.
the demand from Russia.
So you mentioned all those other parts of the economy, particularly the agricultural sector, that are key to how North Korea develops any GDP whatsoever. What's the situation with those? And is the situation with those improving? Is that why we're getting this potential GDP growth this year?
Yeah, well, there are two things that are happening potentially this year. One is certainly, I mean, the ag sector is difficult to predict. North Korea a few years ago, and this coincided to an extent with COVID. Also faced sort of heavy flooding and droughts, so that those sort of end up disrupting the agricultural sector. But the key element here is China. Um, as I said before, China has long been North Korea's only main trading partner. But since the pandemic, they actually shut down the borders to North Korea in order to sort of mitigate any spread of the virus. And North Korea did the same. It is again very difficult to predict how many people in North Korea suffered from the coronavirus, but if estimates were to be believed, they had the situation under control because they shut down their borders with China very very soon after the sort of the first Wuhan outbreak. This, of course, affected trade between China and North Korea. And since China's reopening last year, we are seeing some improvement in direct trade between those two countries. Of course, coming from a very low base. So that's going to be another sort of tailwind to growth in our view for 2024.
Well, stick with us. I just want to raise another issue along those lines, actually. But commentators appear split over one issue in particular that has potentially enormous implications for the wider world, of course. And that is whether the risk of North Korea starting a war is at its highest in a long time right now, or whether or not actually a healthier looking economy makes a conflict with South Korea, Japan and the US less likely. Some onlookers claim Kim Jong-un's already taken the policy decision to go to war and indeed has cast off this assumed goal from before of renormalizing and reunifying with South Korea in a peaceful way. Whereas others say that the so-called collective suicide that any war could entail makes it an unattractive prospect in light of improving conditions at home. So, Anwita Basu, I mean, could an improving economic situation mean a less aggressive North Korea?
I mean, so as much as it is easy to get quite nervous about North Korea, let's be honest, it is a fairly unpredictable state. I would remind people that there are two key elections coming up, and usually before these elections, North Korea has tended to um, get acerbic.
Up the rhetoric
Um,
somewhat.
so
Yeah.
uh, yeah, yeah, exactly. So obviously we have the Korean legislative elections mid-year in South Korea, and then we have the presidentials in the U.S. and almost on point every time there has been a U.S. election, North Korea, at least over the past sort of 2 decades, have kind of upped the rhetoric. So before we get too nervous about the latest situation, um, I would sort of um, exercise caution before we call the so-called dogs of war returning to bite us. The other side of the story is again China. It is not in China's interest for North Korea to start a war within its vicinity. And usually, when the rhetoric has gotten far too hot for China, um, they've stepped in. To an extent, one could argue that China's position now is compromised. What with things happening across strait, and various other issues within its own economy. But that said, China still remains an extremely powerful figure, not least in its growing friendship with Russia, and Russia's growing dependence on China from an economic standpoint. And so this sort of rapprochement and you know uh, arms trade relationship with North Korea could easily be stopped by China if they were to kind of threaten Russia from an economic standpoint, um, and basically ask the kind of partners to behave. So I would definitely exercise caution before calling a war with
Right.
or
Yeah. Well, I
with
think
North
what I mean, you
Korea.
mentioned the
Yeah.
election in the United States, and it's looking highly likely, really, that Donald Trump is going to be the Republican presidential candidate. People will remember his unprecedented trip to North Korea when he was president last time round. What's going to happen if if President Trump is once again elected, and if you bear in mind how it ended last time and how sort of spurned I think Kim Jong Un ended up feeling by that relationship, and how it seemed like it was going so well, and then it didn't really amount to anything. I mean, what's the potential impact of a return of Donald Trump to the presidency in the US?
I mean, obviously, it's one of those elections that are still quite difficult to call, and I think most people are quite nervous about calling it. But a Donald Trump return to the US would mean very interesting things, not only for North Korea, but also for the rest of Asia. I mean, certainly um, post Obama, the US's relationship with Asia deteriorated under Donald Trump. And in some ways it actually improved with North Korea, because Donald Trump gave Kim Jong Un what he wanted, which was some element of legitimacy at the international um, sort of level. Of course, it didn't culminate to eased sanctions and so on that Kim Jong Un wanted. But again, things got disrupted because, well, Trump himself got voted out of power, but also because of the pandemic. So it's going to be interesting, but certainly I'd argue that Kim Jong Un and the North Korean state would probably be happier if Trump were to be back, because he was a partner that was better for them in some
Right.
ways, more accepting in some ways, or somebody they view as who would be open to a conversation um,
Hmm. Yeah, he certainly
versus a democratic precedent.
showed signs of being more willing to engage in one form or another,
Yeah.
didn't he? Anwita Basu from Fitch Solutions, thanks so much for fielding all of our questions here and giving us your expertise.
Thank you for having me.
And thanks to you for watching. There's plenty more from the DW business team here on the DW News YouTube channel, so we'll see you at whatever you choose to watch next. Take care.